We know the Ten Commandments, of course, from Holy Scripture. They're given in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, in the book of Deuteronomy. And so they were a revelation to the Jewish people and to Moses. And the way in which they're expressed in the Old Testament does show the stamp of the particular situation of the Jewish people at that time. But the articles of the Ten Commandments really express in their substance principles of the natural law which are binding on all peoples for all times, and thus the Ten Commandments are not a particular religious ethic, but they really do represent what is necessary for human society and for human persons to grow and develop in any culture, whatever. It's always necessary for a society that people be honest and trustworthy, that they don't steal one another's goods, that they don't break up one another's marriages through adultery and so forth. So the precepts of the Ten Commandments are really of universal human significance and are not simply a particular religious view of Christians or Jews. The Ten Commandments were given under the Old Law, as we call it, the Old Testament, as we Christians call it. But Jesus in the New Testament takes up the Ten Commandments. For instance, in his dialogue with the young rich man who wants to know what he can do to gain eternal life, Jesus begins with a catalog of some of the Ten Commandments. So he reaffirms the Ten Commandments as being necessary to observe in order to gain eternal life. And the same is true of St. Paul in his letter to the Romans. He quotes a number of the precepts from the Ten Commandments, so that the Ten Commandments are not simply a Jewish belief, but they're Christian ethic also, the foundation for Christian ethics. Now, Jesus did somehow modify the Ten Commandments, not in the sense of taking anything away from them, but in the sense of intensifying or radicalizing the Ten Commandments by making them more interior. So whereas the commandment forbids killing, Jesus says, well, even if you're angry with your brother or sister, you are violating the commandment. So he's concerned with the interior dispositions. It's not only the act of adultery, but even the lust that leads to adulterous desires and so forth are condemned by Jesus. So he wants to interiorize the ethic, and he puts it also under the rubric of love. He says that the love of God and neighbor really are the principle on which all the commandments depend. So they are definitely Christian as well as Jewish commands. I would say that in contemporary society, the notion of having to obey any divine commandments is difficult for people. They find it difficult to believe in divine revelation, and our society encourages a kind of egocentrism. It's kind of built on competition between individuals trying to get ahead of one another, and on conflict in business or in economics, in questions of power and politics are all built on competition. And so people make their ethic really the rule of their life is to get ahead of other people, become richer or have more prestige, more fame, more power, higher positions than others. They consider this the mark of success. So the idea of observing commandments is difficult. Perhaps they want others to observe the commandments, but they want to get out of them themselves as much as possible. So I think if people reflect on it, they do see the necessity for self-restraint and for respect and regard for others, and this leads to an openness to a set of rules such as the Ten Commandments, and one can see if one thinks about it that the rules of the Ten Commandments are, as I said at the beginning, very helpful for organizing any human society that's going to be sound and healthy. So I think people can come around to recognizing the value of the Ten Commandments. Since they are a part of the natural law, I think human reason itself can see something very similar to the Ten Commandments are necessary for society if it is not to collapse into competing and warring factions, of war against all, as Thomas Hobbes put it. So I think that in spite of the pressure of people not to recognize the value of the Ten Commandments, reflective people can come to see their importance and escape from the individualistic hedonism to which our culture tends to impel them.